Well, there's no reason why the simple shapes of stories can't be fed into computers. They're beautiful shapes. This quote was taken directly from Kurt Vonnegut in one of his many lectures on the shapes of stories. And in fact, they can and have been fed into computers since then to dive deeper into this theory that he shared for decades in these lectures that he would give all around the country. Kurt Vonnegut, in my opinion, was way ahead of his time in understanding these simple shapes of the stories that we love for our entertainment and the stories that we actually live out in our lives. And that is exactly what we're going to talk about in today's conversation. Welcome to the Storytelling Lab, where we break down the art and science of storytelling. My name is Bennett. I am your host, and I'm a filmmaker and an author on a quest to understand how we can tell better stories so that we can do better work and make the world a better place. Each episode, I host one of the world's best storytellers to help you understand how to leverage storytelling to increase your sales, deepen your connections, and serve your audiences better. What's up, storytellers? Welcome back to the Storytelling Lab podcast. This is episode 183. And last time you and I had a solo episode, we talked about the AI study that was done in 2016, Project Gutenberg, which set out to prove or disprove this theory that Kurt Vonnegut had. Now, Kurt Vonnegut first introduced this way back in the day when he was a student at the University of Chicago studying anthropology. And guess what? This thesis was rejected. Now, in classic Vonnegut form, he made a joke about this rejection. He said it was only rejected because the thesis looked too simple and seemed to be far too much fun. One must not be too playful, he said. And I love that just because he kind of let it roll off his back, but he went on to continue to study this. And that's why I think he was ahead of his time, because he understood that really, no matter how complex our lives stories or the stories that we create are, they're really that simple when you just map out the emotional chart. And that's exactly what he did with a simple X and Y axis. The X axis being B to E, or the beginning of the story to the end of the story. And the Y axis, the vertical axis, simply going from ill fortune at the bottom to good fortune at the top. And the way he viewed these shapes of stories is that we are simply going up or down in these shapes, these simple shapes of stories between good fortune and ill fortune. And he said it's not really where you start, it's the shape of the story that matters. And that's very true. Many stories start all the way low with ill fortune, and by the end of the story, they have ended in the highest high of good fortune. And certainly the opposite of that is quite true as well. Now, Vonnegut found that there were 8 shapes of stories. Fast forward to Project Gutenberg in 2016, they found 6 shapes, but they are very, very similar. Today, we're going to talk about Vonnegut's 8 shapes, what they are, examples of them, and what they mean, most importantly, to you and your storytelling. Now listen, I would be remiss if I didn't let you hear from the man himself. So here's an excerpt from one of the YouTube videos I found of Kurt Vonnegut giving one of his 8 shapes of stories lectures.
Does it have any use in criticizing literature? Well, I think perhaps it does. I think this rise and fall is in fact artificial. It's pretense that we know more about life than we really do. And what's perhaps a true masterpiece cannot be crucified on a cross of this design. Well, all right, let's try Hamlet, okay? Well, I don't have to draw a new level. The sexes are reversed, but he's in the same situation as Cinderella, and a little older. His father has died, and his mother is remarried, his uncle. And so he is depressed as Cinderella. So, he is feeling very unhappy and depressed and everything, and his friend Horatio comes in and says, "Hey, Hamlet, there's this thing up on the parapet. I think you better go talk to it." Says it's your father. And so Hamlet goes up there, and this thing, whatever it is, now we don't know. Is any of you who have horsed around with Ouija boards or with any sort of seances or anything, you know there are malicious spirits around who are looking for saps like you, who are going to find ways to hurt you, give you very bad advice. So to this day, we do not know whether that thing up there on the parapet was really the ghost of his father and whether it was telling him the truth. But the thing said, I'm your father. I was murdered by the man who's now the king, and you've got to avenge me. Well, since we don't know what it was, what it is, it's neither good news nor bad news, because we don't know. And so, all right, Hamlet says, I know what I'll do. I'll stage a play. I'll hire actors and get them to act out the way the murder was described to me, and I'll have the murder suspect watch his reaction. Well, okay, so he does that. It's a flop. Nothing much happens. And so Hamlet is up in his mother's chamber, talking right after this flop and talking, and the curtains wave, or the arras waves, the drapes wave, and so he figures his uncle is back there, his new father, supposedly, and so he's going to finally be decisive, and he pulls out his sword, sticks it through the drapes. Who falls out? This windbag, Polonius. And Shakespeare regards him as a total fool, and giving just the kind of dumb advice parents give their kids when they go away. Neither a borrower nor a lender be. Thanks a lot, Dad. What a swell time. Anyway, is this terrible? Is Hamlet going to get arrested or what? No, it's neither good nor bad news. Just something that happened. All right. So finally, Hamlet gets in a duel and is killed. If he goes to heaven, he's off scale, happy like Cinderella. If he's going to hell, he's off scale, unhappy like Kafka's cockroach. But we don't know. I don't think Hamlet believed in heaven and hell any more than I do. I mean, that Shakespeare didn't. So, I would just prove to you that Shakespeare was as poor a storyteller as any Arapaho. But I haven't. I have, in fact, told you why this is respected as a masterpiece. We are so seldom told the truth. And in Hamlet, Shakespeare tells us. We don't know enough about life to know what the good news is and the bad news is, and we respond to that. Thank you, Bill.
So the first story that he identified, and he says all the time in these lectures, is it's man in a hole. This is also reflected in Project Gutenberg's study. Man in a hole, he said, needn't be about a man nor a hole, but basically something is happening and, I fall into this hole. That means I fall into ill fortune and eventually climb back out for great bliss and good fortune after that. So that's anytime a big problem is dropped onto the character. So you see this a lot in Disney and Pixar films. This is Finding Nemo. Marlin and Nemo are going along about their normal life. Then, all of a sudden he gets pulled away from the wake of the boat, or he chases the boat. I can't even remember what happened. And Marlin has to spend the rest of the story trying to find Nemo. So this is simply, we start at the top and we have ill fortune dropped upon us and we have to climb out of that hole. The next one that Kurt Vonnegut identifies is also very, very common, just like man in the hole. And he said it's boy meets girl. And again, he says, although it needn't be about a boy and it needn't be about a girl. But this is simply when we're going on about our lives and we meet a girl, in this case, and we're shot up into this good fortune part of the XY axis. And then it's going along great, it's going along swimmingly, and then boom, something happens and drops us to a state of ill fortune. We are heartbroken. Neither one of us are ready. We're not prepared for the for the relationship. And then slowly we climb back out of that and we end in, happily ever after. So boy meets girl ends up being a rise, fall, rise pattern. The next one he says is very Kafka-esque, is simply we start off bad and it gets worse. Like that's this story. And that's any tragedy. So we mentioned a couple weeks ago about Darren Aronofsky's films. This very much feels like Requiem for a Dream for me, right? It's just like we start off with addiction and we end just terribly. So we have several movies and several stories like that where it just goes from bad to worse. The fourth story type that Kurt Vonnegut identifies is which way is up. And he says that this one most commonly reflects the real human experience where things are happening to the character and you're not sure if they're going to ultimately end up being good or you're not sure if they're going to ultimately end up being bad, but they're up and down, up and down, up and down. The first one that comes to my mind is Forrest Gump. All of these events that happen to him just seem to kind of be loose events just happening to him, and they're not part of this greater plot necessarily. It's not really till the end that we understand how they all tie together. Many stories take this shape, and it's kind of like, I think we love it because it feels very much like our real lives. Like things are up, things are down, things are up, things are down. Which way is up is the fourth story shape that Kurt Vonnegut found. The fifth story shape that Kurt Vonnegut found is the creation story shape, and that is a constant climb from ill fortune to good fortune. He said this one is very, very popular in Western audiences, and I always think of Rocky with this. I mean, this is the classic story of an underdog who started off just a bum fighter making, $50 a fight. Nobody loves him. His trainer kicks him out of the gym that he's working out at. Like everything is just terrible. And it's not just, it is ultimately a consistent climb. Things get better. He meets a love. He gets the trainer, and then eventually fights for the title, the heavyweight championship of the world. So it ends on the highest note. Even though he doesn't win, that doesn't matter because from him, he's gone to now someone who's known in the fighting circuit and someone who is respected because he goes the distance with the champ. But it is a series of kind of like incremental steps up all along the way. Sure, there might be some down steps, but not really big ones. Like he doesn't really lose anybody. He doesn't really experience any real significant setbacks back to ill fortune in that journey of the first Rocky. So that is an example of the fifth story shape, the creation story. The sixth story shape identified by Kurt Vonnegut is the Old Testament shape. Now, this is one where things are going well, and there's this kind of consistent rise in the first part of the story, and then it is followed by a tragic downfall at the end. I mean, Old Testament is where, known as where there's a lot of punishment and things like that. So it does not end well. It starts off with just a series of ups and downs, and ultimately it tends to collapse. So one that comes to mind is No Country for Old Men, which might feel like a tragedy for folks, but there is some ups and downs when you see Josh Brolin's character, the main character, finding the money and seeming like he's going to be able to escape Javier Bardem's character, and ultimately, I mean, it just ends in a tragedy, but it is this series of ups and downs where we're not sure where it's going to go, and also he's been given this gift, he found this money, things were kind of bestowed upon him, it's kind of this cat and mouse game, we're not sure which way it's going to go, and then ultimately it just ends up being this complete disaster of enormous proportions. Now, the next two story shapes and the final two story shapes from Vonnegut's 8 Shapes of Stories are very, very similar. In fact, these two, the similarities between these two, I don't want to say plagued him, but it just stuck in his mind since he first had this idea as a young man and really made him want to dive deeper into understanding these simple shapes of stories, as he calls them. So the first one is the New Testament, which is you kind of start in the middle of the y-axis, the good fortune and ill fortune, and you get these little gifts bestowed upon you. Things are incrementally getting better and better and better for you, and then there's this big drop off, and then an eventual rise back to good fortune. And an example of that might be Great Expectations. He starts kind of normal, then all of a sudden something happens to him, and people start buying his art, and he gets more popular, et cetera, and then obviously a big drop off, and ending with good fortune in the end. This is very similar to the 8th story arc, which he says is extremely common, and every time someone tells a story in this shape that makes $1 million, and that is the Cinderella story shape. Also very similar, except that he says that she starts off in terrible, terrible ill fortune. Now, who could start off in such a bad place? A little girl whose parents just died, right? So she's starting, and she's got a stepmom and two awful stepsisters. So she starts off really low. Instead of starting somewhere there in the middle, starts off really bad. And so when she sees that little incremental progress towards good fortune, it's just getting her back to like baseline, basically. And then she goes to the ball and it gets better, and she meets the prince, and all of a sudden it strikes midnight. Tragic downfall, until it takes a little bit longer for this ascension back to good fortune to happen, until the prince finds her and the slipper fits and puts it back on her. Side note, and this might be a whole nother episode if we wanted to get into this, Vonnegut also saw similarities between the story of Christianity and Cinderella, with the stroke of midnight paralleling us being kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and Cinderella's rise to good fortune reflecting Jesus Christ's eventual redemption. I'll save reservations of whether that's true or not. I do see the similarities, but the point is, what I want you to focus on and think about is how Kurt Vonnegut's mind saw these stories. He saw the simple shapes that were so easy to compare with the stories that we live, the stories of our lives. And he says that any story that you have, this is his theory, again, a rejected thesis, but it still should make you think. Any story that we've ever written, he believes can fit into one of these 8 shapes. And whether you think it's the 6 from Project Gutenberg or the 8 from Kurt Vonnegut, the point is there's not that many emotional storylines that we can have. And ultimately, as he said, it doesn't matter where you start, it's the shape of the story. Where and when does that curve end in good fortune, or does it end in ill fortune? And the biggest thing that I want you to take away from this is he really looked at these through the lens of the stories that we live. I've mentioned it multiple times, but the stories of our lives, in a way that when we are living out those stories, right now, me and you, in this very moment, you're listening, I'm talking, this is a moment in our story, at least of today, maybe this week, maybe our larger life story. But we so rarely stop and realize when we're in good fortune, hey, this is actually a pretty good day. Like, we don't do that. We don't understand when we're in ill fortune that we won't be there forever. It's just part of the shape of our story. And when you can zoom out and look at your story objectively like that, it really helps you move forward, because you understand, one, you will not always be in ill fortune. A change needs to happen. And two, it's not always going to be good fortune either. So be prepared for the ups and downs. Life is a roller coaster. Be prepared. And it doesn't matter where you start. It's the shape of your story that matters. Tune in next time on the Storytelling Lab, where we will continue to help you become a better storyteller. My name is Rain Bennett. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed that episode, do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. If you're already a subscriber and you're enjoying the show, give us a review and let us know the value that you've gotten from it. We love to hear from our listeners and learn about the benefits that they're getting from the show. That's what fuels us, and that's what fuels the show. And if you've already subscribed and you've already reviewed it and you think there's someone else that would benefit from listening to this show, please share it with them. The more we grow, the more we can help you grow, and that's what we're here to do. Join us next time on the Storytelling Lab.